Okay, colleagues, greetings and welcome back. So today a shorter video, a bit of a note to self, an important topic that I keep coming back to, something I should do a longer video on. So one of the biggest topics, in fact, in all of the courses that I teach, is this transition from the teleological, kind of more natural, teleological to the mechanistic, more scientific, if you want, understanding of the world. And I think this is a huge and hugely important transformation, possibly the most important transformation in the intellectual history of humanity. Again, the transition from thinking about nature and ourselves in teleological terms, like as agents with purposes, forces which have souls behind them. The transition from that kind of a worldview to a worldview which is, guided, in the words of Immanuel Kant, by the abyss of the purposeless chaos of matter. Well, in fact, I said guided, actually not guided at all. Not really guided, but driven by anonymous, impersonal, structural forces. And I think it's a very important transformation because it allows us to see reality more clearly. It allows us to understand nature better, to understand the universe, let's say cosmology better. But also, I think it allows us to understand life, and especially human life, much better. And therefore, has very important ethical and political implications. So if I were to try to summarize the conclusion that I'm trying to reach, there's this phrase you might have heard from me, that human beings are anxious and mostly unconscious products of larger forces of biological and cultural evolution. But we are manufactured by these forces, by the logic of these systems. We are manufactured not in order to be happy or to find meaning in life, but basically, there's a certain logic of perpetuation of these anonymous systems. You may want to call it efficiency for the sake of efficiency. We are just, byproducts of that. Another way, maybe a more physical way of looking at it, is again this beautiful metaphor from, among other people, from Sean Carroll. Again, this idea that there's this universal increase in entropy. Entropy increases with time, and life in general, and human life in particular, and human, let's say, political and social life, the existence of humanity, is kind of an accidental byproduct of this increase in entropy, universal increase in entropy, evolution of the universe towards the heat death. Again, there are many implications of this picture. One is that, again, Hobbesian notion that nothing is good or evil in and of itself, or kind of lowering the pretensions of morality, the kind of Hobbes as Nietzsche before Nietzsche. There are no capital V values, there are only small v values, are trying to make life slightly more palatable, to make life slightly more miserable for ourselves and, people who are close to us. And I feel a deeply important element of hedonism, right? Of life, meaningful life as a pleasurable life. But of course, the word pleasure is difficult to define. Say meaningful life as a happy life. Kind of this immanent criterion of goodness, immanent in the sense that kind of available straightforwardly to your own consciousness from within your own head, as opposed to, let's say, external or transcendent criterion. I feel that there's a broad overlap. There's a space for a very productive dialogue between disparate figures such as the Buddha on the one hand, Socrates on the other, but also Nietzsche, but also Marx, and also, Thomas Hobbes, let's say, all of whom I think are broadly speaking on board with this project. Project of what I might call kind of naturalistic ethics. People often, sometimes people talk about this in terms of eudaimonism. Happiness and virtue or goodness are related, and in fact, both happiness and virtue or excellence, or like moral goodness, are somehow related to knowledge and to correct understanding. Of course, students immediately jump in and ask me, but is this harmonious vision of society possible? And I think the preliminary answer has to be yes, because even though there are no capital V values, and so our small v values are relative to our nature, but at the same time, human nature is by and large similar. I mean, we all breathe the same air, we all eat the same food, we're all equally, let's say, poisoned by the same poisons. And to give another example, we all equally want to get over COVID. All, or at least almost all of us. And if there are some weird one-off exceptions, maybe we need not necessarily focus on them and just, focus on the broad overarching consensus. I feel that the vast majority of people can agree on the vast majority of values. And to continue on from there, actually a more important point, the reason why I'm actually making this video is to maybe thematize the notion of free will, because I feel that actually in an important respect at the root of this mechanistic, naturalistic project of ethics is the deep rejection of the idea of free will. Again, human beings are products of larger forces of biological and cultural evolution. Sometimes we do things for, broadly speaking, biological evolutionary reasons. Sometimes we do things for, reasons of cultural evolution. We are the way we are because of our biology, or maybe because of our cultural history. Of course, cultural history is an outgrowth of, cultural evolution is an outgrowth of biological evolution, but that's a topic for another day. So I think ultimately kind of this fundamental error of teleological worldview is to attribute agency, souls, if you want, to kind of natural forces which we today in physics or chemistry or biology tend to think of as, again, structural, anonymous, impersonal, maybe just mathematical regularities. And in a similar fashion, I want to continue this project into anthropology. Like, magnets don't have souls, and human beings don't have souls. Magnets are not to blame for anything. You don't blame a tree for falling onto you. In the same way, in a deep, important respect, human beings are not to blame for anything. It's just a category mistake. And we need to get over it. And I think that if we do that, we become, individually, we become happier. But also ethically, we are in a better position to treat our closest relatives, family and friends. And also, very importantly, I feel that understanding that human beings do not have free will and therefore are not to blame really for anything also makes for a much better, much more productive political project. Give just one example, right? So criminality on this account, obviously very often people are in prison not because they have committed crimes, but because our social system is repressive. But even when a person fair and square committed a particular crime, on this naturalistic view, the idea would be that it's, in a deep sense, it is not their fault. People are the way they are because of their biology and because of the way culture makes us. And basically, so like criminality would be like a disease and therefore would have a kind of a medical solution. If we change, if we restructure the social system in a more rational fashion, then we would be able to get over criminality, the same way that we can get over diseases like COVID, for example. And I feel that this deep optimism, this deep aspiration is at the root of the entire project of Western political philosophy, but also at the root of the project of enlightenment. It can be traced to philosophers such as, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle in the Western tradition, but also to people like Thomas Hobbes, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, or Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Also, I feel in the Eastern tradition, the Taoists and the Buddhists are, broadly speaking, on board with this project as well. Maybe even the Confucians. Now, in an important respect, I think this is the biggest promise of political philosophy. This hope that we can restructure society in a more rational basis, such that we can reconcile the interests of the individual and the interests of society, achieve this genuine harmony. And this ideal that goes back to Plato's Republic, justice as harmony, justice in the soul as harmony of the soul, justice in the body politic, in society as harmony in society. That's the hope. Of course, this hope has a lot of challenges along the way. I mean, like, technically speaking, how do we achieve this? And also this very dangerous possibility of ideology, basically. A certain systematic misrepresentation of reality, when basically our culture tells us that our social arrangement is harmonious, but in fact it is not. Again, this, think of the slave-holding ideology that, actually, slaves should obey the masters. It's in the interest of the slave, right? Of course, something that we today overwhelmingly believe is a falsehood and a misrepresentation. However, you can imagine in the ancient world both slaves and masters buying into this ideology. Or conversely, in the Middle Ages, you can think of, again, the divine right of kings and the serfs, who are legally owned by the lords, physically bought and sold, today we would think a very conflictual, very exploitative arrangement. However, presented at the time, by the clergy, by the universities, right, by the leading intellectuals, presented at the time as natural, inevitable, and in fact good in many ways. So this is a thought that I've been expressing over and over again, right? But this promise of political philosophy to find this harmonious arrangement, and also the challenge of political philosophy, that when we think we have found this political arrangement, we always have to be suspicious whether we have truly achieved a utopia, or maybe our ideology is simply too efficient in lying to us, in misleading us. Right? As Rick Roderick puts it wonderfully, like, do you have a good argument or a bad symptom? Do you have a good argument or a bad symptom? Always a deeply disconcerting question to ask. But let me once again circle back to what I think is the most important element of this positive ethical and political project. Again, namely, within the schema of transition from teleological to the mechanistic worldview. We don't believe in souls anymore. We don't believe it's raining because the god of rain wants it to rain. Likewise, we shouldn't think of human beings as having souls and having free will. It's not raining because of the god of rain, and people don't commit crimes because they have evil souls. Let's say it's not the devil that makes people quote-unquote sin, and it's not kind of the personal diabolic nature of a particular soul that makes a person commit crimes, let's say, or do bad things. But, as Socrates says, again, this is not such a radical view in the history of Western philosophy. I mean, Socrates, for example, held that nobody does wrong willingly. Nobody does wrong willingly. Any kind of crime or a transgression, at the end of the day, can be traced to a certain kind of misunderstanding. And let me say that in many ways I'm very optimistic about this project, but also I have to tell you that I feel that it is very much an uphill struggle, an uphill intellectual struggle to think in these terms and to maintain these terms in one's head. Andrei, my wonderful colleague in the Philosophy of Science course, gave this wonderful presentation about transition from teleological to mechanistic, and how he said that it's actually very difficult to think in mechanistic terms, and we're always tempted to go back to teleological terms. And I feel that in the sphere of personal relationships, right, when we treat other human beings, it is all the more difficult. I think it's much easier to start seeing, let's say, laws of physics in mechanistic terms, but it's much more difficult to start seeing other people in mechanistic terms. We have this long history of evolutionary psychology, right? That irrational portions of our brain, irrational parts, systems in our brain that work against us, and therefore that we have to work against to keep in check. So in many ways, I feel that it is a daily struggle in the life of each thinking person to try to maintain mindfulness and to think in these, mechanistic, non-teleological terms. So maybe I should make a nod to the three philosophers I'm taking on my shield this year, Nietzsche, Marx, and Buddha. And I want to say that in their own ways, I feel that all three of them, Nietzsche and Marx and Buddha, are broadly speaking on board with this mechanistic enterprise of naturalistic ethics. And also all three recognize the danger of being misled, of tendency of our psychology and tendency of our culture to misrepresent reality, this ideological tendency. And therefore, Nietzsche, Buddha, and Marx would recognize, I feel, the necessity for this kind of daily struggle. Anyway, I'm sure there's more to be said on this topic, and I very much hope to be able to return to it in the future at greater length. I guess even more so, I'm hopeful that I will be able to maintain this clarity of mind, clarity of thinking, maintain the mechanistic approach, and not give in to the temptations of the more primitive portions of my brain and sort of collapse back into old judgmental teleological categories, so that hopefully we can continue this productive dialogue together in conversations with you, my dear colleagues. Very much looking forward to that. And so, until next time, as always, stay safe and take care.